Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor, and today I wanted to talk about Hannah Ryggen and resisting authoritarianism. And I think to the extent that we desire role models for resisting fascism, it's hard to find a better one, particularly in the world of fiber art, than Hannah Ryggen. And I have read a fair amount of this book by Marit Pasha, Threads of Defiance. I've seen a lot of Ryggen's works in the Scandinavian countries. In fact, this is her weaving loom. Let's see if I can get that zeroed in for you. There you go. That is the loom that she wove on. Now, this was exhibited in Brekstad. I saw it in Trondheim in March, and some of you may recall a few months back, I did a video on what I saw when I was there. But today I thought, since I got a request to do this, I would kind of zero in specifically on Ryggen and her bold resistance to fascism. It was very outspoken. So she was weaving at a time of great upheaval in Europe. Her career started in, I want to say, the 20s and lasted into the 70s. So she was a prolific weaver. She went to art school, and I believe in Sweden, and was, obviously is a woman in the men's world of art, was already out of place, but she met her husband there. In fact, I think it might have been in Germany. Was it in Leipzig? I'm trying to remember some of the details. I really wanted to just focus in on her political involvement today. But she met her husband, Hans Ryggen, at art school. I should look up. So she was born in 1894 in Malmö in Sweden. And I've also seen some, it was in Dresden. There we go. So here's the section, Dresden and Hans Ryggen. He was a painter. I saw some of his works in Trondheim when I was there. And they were both politically involved. At the time when Ryggen decided, I'm going to become a weaver, really the language of political discourse in art was concentrated on, I want to say, painting. Now, if somebody else wants to say it was sculpture too, I would not disagree with that. But weaving was more concentrated in the areas of like folklore, folk culture, and women's work. In fact, there were, here's an example of a tapestry from the 18th century. This has religious motifs. So a lot of religious motifs went into tapestries prior to Ryggen's work. That particular work here is from 1717, and it shows the adoration of the Magi. And there was a so-called tapestry artist around the turn of the previous century named Gerhard Munter. Here is a work of his. And the emphasis laid on his work in this book by Pasha is that while he designed the sketches, the weavings themselves were the product of women's hands. And then she labels Ryggen as a pioneering woman because Ryggen was like, the heck with that. I am going to make weaving my primary artistic means, and it is going to be as outspoken as the work of any man. And she really succeeded. She was exhibited at World's Fairs. She was exhibited widely in Europe, especially in Sweden. Got some pretty crazy dogs there. My son decided to buy a puppy, a rather rambunctious puppy, and it's been a circus around here, so it's a lot of fun to have a puppy. But let me just, before I go into the subjects of the specific tapestries that I want to talk about, go into her way of working, because it was rather extraordinary. So I showed you the loom that she used. It was tapestry loom, obviously upright. She grew her flax, she grew her wool, she carded it, she spun it, and when she wove, she used flax or linen for the warp, and she used wool for the weft. So this was the predominant means that she used when she was weaving. She also did her dyeing by herself. She grew the plants that she needed, or she would find them, moss, bark, plants, lots of different things, or she would acquire, whatever she needed. But she even used her own mordants, even to the extent of using urine, depending on what it was needed, what worked best. She studied weaving for quite a long time before she really got into her monumental work. So a good decade or so is what Pasha tells us. She worked to really master the skill that she needed in order to acquire and express her voice through weaving. So as far as fiber artists go, in my book, Hanna Ryggen is just top of the line. She's just a kind of a hero for me. And when I think of my fiber art professor in my novels and the kind of knowledge, the background that she would have to bring to her students at my fictitious university, Great Plains University, and she's from Norway, right? She would have known Ryggen's work inside and out. She would have been familiar with it because she was from Trondheim too. And Ryggen lived in Ørland, which was in the Trøndelag area, like county, was in that whole area. That's why a lot of her works are still in Trondheim. In fact, there are archives with photos of her and notes and diaries and this kind of thing. The university, the major university there in Trondheim. In fact, after reviewing this information and studying further and seeing what little I did in Stockholm, I'm like, I want to go back. I want to go back to Trondheim. And I would like to go to Oslo because I think a lot of Ryggen's works are also available for visiting there. When I was at Trondheim, the Museum of, I guess, Decorative Arts was closed because it was under renovation, and they were dickering over funding that they wanted from the government in order to have the kind of renovations that they wanted. So some of her biggest tapestries were on display in Brixstad at this sort of library area. It was really cool to see them, but they were all behind glass, and it was, it was just a few of them. It was great, but it's like, darn, there's so many more, and I know there are probably more that I could see if I undertook the effort. So I might try to do that. But in any case, she was just extraordinary. Not only did she do all these things on her own, using her own knowledge and living off the land. They had no electricity, and she had a daughter with epilepsy. She really struggled with a lot of things that she was dealing with. But she loved the landscape there, the flat landscape on the fjord. But she did all this stuff by her own, growing her own flax, raising her own wool, carding it, cleaning it, combing it, spinning it, warping her loom that her husband made, and then, weaving these incredible, and these were like, wall-sized tapestries, one after the other. So let's just dive in here to her fascist resistance, and we'll start off with a tapestry that, let me see if I can find it in here. It's called Ethiopia, and she was protesting Mussolini's decision to try to build this empire. Italy already had Eritrea, and I'm trying to remember if it was Somalia. And Mussolini was like, well, it's the only place left where I can still get an empire, so I'm going to just take over Ethiopia. And a lot of the information about this situation was in the newspapers in Norway. And there's a lot of speculation in this book about whether or not Ryggen was communist, like a card-carrying communist, or if she was just sympathetic to this particular dimension of resistance to fascism, because it's right versus left politics in a nutshell. And the conclusion that the author draws was there's no specific concrete evidence that she was a member of the Communist Party. However, she espoused what the author Pasha called humanitarian ideals and international humanitarian ideals, which some of the early communists, that's, really what they were trying to further. Workers' rights, if you did the work, you should receive the pay for whatever it was that you made. But, really very simple humanitarian type ideals. And that was what Ryggen furthered. So here is, I'll just try to get this into focus the best I can. Obviously, this is just in the book, right? But this is Ethiopia. She did this tapestry over the course of a month. And I did see it. And it's quite extraordinary. Let me see if it gives the measures. It gives the measurements here in centimeters. So 380 centimeters across. So that's close to 4 meters across. Close to like 4 yards. And 160 centimeters tall. She did this in a month. Isn't that crazy? And the bottom part is more or less decorative. But then if we start scanning from the left, we have a black person who probably symbolizes the residents of Ethiopia. And then we have Mussolini here. And we have these various hands in different colors. And we have the King of Ethiopia. And over here, I'm sorry, this is not Mussolini. So this guy, it's a little bit unclear who that is. Now, that is maybe an ambassador who was working with the League of Nations to try to defuse the situation. And it was pointed out that that cross symbolizes the Norwegian fascist-leaning party. This tapestry is from 1935, so 2 years after Hitler came to power. And then over here we have a native, African native, with Mussolini's head on a spear. So one thing stands out to me about this. So we're talking about resistance to authoritarianism and the bold expression. Mussolini was alive at this point in time. And so basically Ryggen is suggesting here that she would just as soon see Mussolini's head on a skewer. Now that's bold. And, so you've gone from decorative weavings with, and I showed a few the other day when I was showing you the museums that I saw in Stockholm with flowers and birds and bold colors that make you happy and stuff like that. And now we've got Mussolini's head on a spear. So this is just a very salient example of Ryggen's art and how overtly political she was in her expression and just fearless, And this art wasn't without consequences. Now, did she end up in jail personally? No, but her husband did. Hans Ryggen did end up in a concentration camp in Norway in 1944. Now, there's a little quote here in the book from Ryggen. She writes that she wove this tapestry in outrage over the course of just 1 month as a protest against the war that was occurring under Mussolini. An impromptu tapestry woven in haste, black heads, white diplomats in between, clubs and spears, and throughout my determination to nail Mussolini with a black man's spear. So, very overt protest through art, through the means of fiber art, which I just think is so extraordinary. As someone who earned her art history degree in 1981 and devoted further study to the topic in 83, you can imagine that my encounters with female artists were few and far between. So this is just so refreshing to me to have this opportunity to study a female artist who's a fiber artist, no less, and was just so fearless. So now I'm going to look at a tapestry called Death of Dreams from 1936, and I'm going to try to zero in on this the best that I can. Again, it's just a reproduction in the book, but in the middle we have Karl von Ossietzky. So the reason why Ryggen seized on this particular man so he's imprisoned, his legs are dangling down there, and we have these red-faced fascists who are responsible for his imprisonment, including, as you can tell, Hitler. Ossietzky shared with the world the fact that Germany was rearming itself in rejection of the Treaty of Versailles from was like 1920, around in there. So the Treaty of Versailles dictated that Germany was to be peaceful and was not to have weapons. And when Hitler came into power, that was one of the first things that happened, was that Germany all of a sudden was rearming itself. Ossietzky basically shared this information with the world, and then on the one hand was decried as a perpetrator of treason by the fascists. On the other hand, was under consideration for the Nobel Peace Prize, which was a process that was unfolding in Norway. And while Ossietzky was being considered for the Nobel Peace Prize in Norway, he was being imprisoned in a concentration camp in Germany. And that is the topic of this tapestry. And over here with the violin, that is depicting Einstein. Einstein, by this point, was a resistor to fascism, and of course ended up in the United States. And on the right we have other victims of imprisonment. So when Ryggen called this tapestry the death of dreams, basically her statement was that fascism under Hitler was killing people's dreams. It was taking away people's dreams of peace, people's dreams of prosperity, people's dreams of freedom. So this tapestry met with a lot of controversy, but it was also well received. It was exhibited, and it contributed to her fame and her reputation. So there are a couple of others here I want to look at. There's another resistor that Ryggen portrayed in her tapestries. It's a very powerful tapestry. This tapestry considers Liselotte Hermann, and I'll just read you a couple facts about Hermann and why she was selected. She was a student in Stuttgart and Berlin, worked in the Red Student League, the Roter Studentenbund, and signed in 1933 a manifesto, Defense of Democratic Rights and Freedoms, and was therefore expelled from the university. So, we can relate that. We've seen students dragged off the streets for participating in pro-Palestinian protests. Her husband, Liselotte Hermann's husband, was also a political activist and was murdered by the Gestapo. And then from that point on, she worked illegally. She had a son to whom she gave birth in 1934, named Walter, and she was imprisoned and was basically, I'm trying to think of the right word, she was sentenced to death for quote-unquote treason, and a means is an attempt to extract confessions and information from her. They tormented her with this threat towards her son. So she was asked to say goodbye to her son, his name was Walter, whose clothes were thrown into Liselotte Hermann's jail cell. And there was a point where the people who had imprisoned her tormented her with sounds of a baby from another cell. They claimed that they were torturing her son in order to extract information from her. So in this weaving, which is from 1938, over on the left we see Liselotte feeding her baby, Walter, but then on the right she's in prison. And the sort of step from prison to from her life as a mother to the prison is shown by just this one footprint. It's made very concrete and palpable by Ryggen by just showing it just lives one step, and boom, she was thrown from being a happy mother to being a prisoner. And she's shown holding her baby's clothes in the prison cell. And what else do we have? This kind of threatening figure in the back in the red, who is sort of overseeing the whole affair with her political imprisonment. And there's also, if you look at the way the brick-like part of the weaving is done, it gives the impression of a cross, so that also suggests martyrdom. And we again have a very concrete, palpable, overt protest towards authoritarianism and fascism on the part of Ryggen with this gorgeous tapestry, which is close to 2 yards tall. So it says 190 centimeters tall and 155 centimeters across. So that's like 1.5 yards. So it's a significant tapestry. And this newspaper clipping is suggested as being the model, the original for the image of Lieselotte Hermann that Ryggen put into her tapestry. So this was from 1938, and there's a lot of evidence that Ryggen read the newspapers, she reacted to the newspapers, she gave vent to her anger in her art, and there's one more tapestry that I want to talk about. And if you're interested enough in this, just let me know. She did other protests later after the war, relating to the environment and Vietnam and a lot of other events. So I would be happy to go into more detail. So this tapestry is called 6 October 1942. And as you can tell, it's just, we're looking at a book image of a tapestry that's multiple yards across. Let me give you the dimensions again of this one. 420, so it's over 4 yards across. And this was a section, and then the Churchill was like an inserted section, and then this third section. So she, on her loom, she basically wove 3 tapestries and she sewed them together. So on the left, what this is portraying, and you can see, all the violence and also the caricature of fascist leaders. The man who is being killed is, I believe his name is Gedich. He was the director of the theater in Trondheim and was murdered the day before a production of an Ibsen play. Henry Gleditsch, the head of the Trøndelag Theater. And he was denounced by the Nazis, who by then were occupying Norway. And as the director of the theater, used his office, to resist fascism in his own way with the plays that he put into production. The story is that the fascists who took over in Norway in the government wanted to make examples of prominent cultural leaders, and they chose Gleditsch, this theater director, as one of those people. So this tapestry, again, is called 6 October 1942 because that's the day when he was murdered. The woman in the cap who's kneeling by his side is his wife. She was also supposed to be in the play the following day. And this guy behind is apparently an image of a Serbian prisoner who, there were multiple Serbian prisoners at that time who were basically murdered for asking for bread. And up above, we have Hitler being caricatured with, every time I read about this tapestry, I'm told those are oak leaves coming out of his anus. So whatever it is coming out of his anus, it's obviously an insult. And the 2 black figures who are crows flying by his head are Norwegian participants in the fascist regime that are also being caricatured. Then we have Ryggen's own family, and it almost looks like they're hoping to flee. And we've got these red-faced fascist leaders from Norway up above them. But they're in a boat on, presumably, Trondheim Fjord. And the boat is filled with roses, and those, I read, are symbols of hope. So in the middle we have Hans, and then we have their daughter, I believe her name was Mona. No, that's her over here. And this is Hannah over here, holding onto a cow's head, as what Pasha, the author of this book, speculates may be a symbol of her desire to still cling to her homeland. So this is right smack dab during World War II. She is using weaving as an overt means of protesting what is transpiring in Norway with the Hitler fascist occupation. And, you know, it's just no holds barred. Here's a close-up of the more political part of the weaving of the tapestry. It's brilliant art. And getting to see these in person is obviously, it's a moving experience. It really is. It's just fantastic. I can show you just a few more images of pictures that I took while I was in Trondheim and Brekstad. So it's not a great picture, but at least you have a sense. So this is behind glass and there's some reflection, but at least I was able to see, even if it was behind glass, the actual tapestry. Sorry, I'm kind of moving around. Here's a detail from the one involving Osiecki that I saw while I was over there. And there's Einstein, kind of a close-up that I took. What else have we got? There's Osiecki in the middle with the henchmen, including Hitler. And from the tapestry I just showed you, the Ryggen family. And we have Churchill over there, just sort of, you know, standing as this bulwark, as the defender of England, sort of symbolically offering an antidote to the violence that is going on. And here's my photograph of the more violent side of that tapestry, which I got to see in person, which was just awesome. It's, you know, finding fiber art I'm just throwing this in. This is a yarn store in Brekstad. I was just writing about this in my current novel. This place was just incredible. So, a little bit on the layer. Can you believe that? This is in Brekstad. This yarn store, I mean, it's like a yarn warehouse. And it was just in a town of 3,000 people. So anyhow, I really need to go back to Trondheim. But I saw other tapestries by her. I had to, like I say, I really had to chase them down in order to find them. But it was so worth it. And I look forward to the day when it's easier to see multiple tapestries of hers in one place without having to, you know, board a speedboat and go an hour away to catch them or whatever. So in any case, if you're interested in more information on Ryggen, let me know. I was sort of inspired because I saw a blog post. Again, I'm writing about her in my novel. She keeps coming up because she's just such a source of inspiration, both for myself and for the characters in my novel. And the whole point was that she's a role model for resistance to authoritarianism. So a very timely fiber artist, perhaps the most timely. If you know of fiber artists that are more timely than Ryggen, let me know, because I would love to look into them and dig into this topic a little bit more. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. Hope you're inspired by Ryggen's work yourself, that you could buy this book. I'll put a link to it. It's well worth having. It's a translation, I guess, from Norwegian, I believe. It's really good. So thanks for listening, and I'll continue to keep you updated on my book. I'm getting the novel uploaded. I want to have everything ready to go for a nice little launch and make sure it's available to the widest possible audience in the widest possible number of forms. Somebody asked me today, are you going to do an audiobook? Yes, I would love to do audiobooks for these novels. The question is how and at what expense. So I'm going to continue studying that, particularly because I have a blind protagonist, you know, starting from book 5, and there are plenty of blind people who would rather use audiobooks than, you know, try to get something in Braille or whatever. So keep asking your questions, keep inspiring me, and thank you, and I'll be back at you soon with more. Take care. Bye.